Chief Diaz and I had many discussions over the years, and I think he should be commended by suggesting that we put the needs of the city first. We put the needs of the police department first. He's agreed to set aside and to work on special projects and to realize the kind of culture change that we want perhaps could be better served with him stepping aside.
Well, that's Mayor Bruce Harrell talking about the shocking but perhaps not unexpected news that Seattle Police Chief Adrian Diaz will be removed from his post and moved into special assignments. This happening after months of allegations that the SPD under Diaz's leadership was unwelcoming and at times discriminatory toward women and people of color. What pushed the mayor into making this decision? Plus, we have an interim chief in Sue Rahr, former King County Sheriff. But who should take this chief role permanently? Someone inside the department, someone outside of it? Some big questions. We are working on some answers this week on Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on the Seattle channel, and the views expressed here are mine. And I'm with my co-host, David Croman, City Hall reporter for the Seattle Times. David, I got to ask, man, I've seen you posting about this. Are you still testing positive for COVID? What's going on, man? Are you doing okay?
No, I'm negative now, which is great. Which was good timing because that means I could go to the press conference and stuff today. So I'm officially over COVID, which is great.
Awesome.
But yeah, I've been feeling better for basically a week, but just the tests kept coming up positive, which, we've got vulnerable people in my family, so it was just trying to be ultra safe.
Got to be careful. I don't like being negative in general, but in this case, I'll definitely take it, David. And I'm glad you're doing okay. Yeah. And yeah, we are talking, folks, here just in the wake of these big press conferences on Wednesday about Chief Diaz taking on this new role. So we're coming at you a little bit later than we usually do here, but we appreciate your patience there. Thank you, David, as always. Thanks to City Grind Espresso, our background noise sponsor for the audio podcast. They're on the first floor of City Hall. A special thanks to the patrons who keep the show going, like Alice. Thank you for your support, Alice. You really keep things going for us. We appreciate that. Here's the deal. If you become a patron, you get access to Patrons First content before anybody else. Even get your own Seattle News, Views, and Brews decal. How about that for just $5 a month? We'll answer your questions about City Hall and the podcast as well. Check it out on Patreon, Seattle News, Views, and Brews. A huge thanks also to Converge Media. The video version of the podcast is on Converge Wednesday nights at 7. It's going to be Thursday this week. Let's get this going with right here, right now. All right, well, David, here we have it. The big news of the week, Chief Adrian Diaz will no longer be leading the Seattle Police Department. He'll be replaced by an interim chief in Sue Rahr, former King County Sheriff, who will not be a candidate for the permanent job. This announcement coming from Mayor Bruce Harrell on Wednesday afternoon, and thus an SPD chief that entered during the tumult of the pandemic and the racial reckoning around George Floyd's murder in 2020 leaves his role in another turbulent time. The SPD is losing officers, and the reports, such as the 30 by 30 report commissioned by the Seattle Police, have illustrated concerns that Diaz has been unwelcoming to people of color and women, sometimes allegedly discriminatory. David, just a huge story here. Do you think there was a final straw here? I know a lot of talk about this in the press conference, too. What finally led Mayor Harrell to remove Chief Diaz from his position after the mayor had been saying so long, we're going to let due process do its thing, but here we are. What happened here?
Yeah, Mayor Harrell kept saying there was no epiphany or there was no single straw here. I have to say it was a little bit of in some ways, kind of a little bit of an odd announcement, because Chief Diaz is essentially being fired here, and yet he's at the press conference of his own firing, and so Mayor Harrell was sort of trying to have it both ways, a bit of a thank you going away press conference, while the fact of the matter, he's announcing that he's firing Chief Diaz. I think what ended up happening is not any sort of one moment, at least not that we know, that Mayor Harrell was saying, but at a certain point, the job of police chief is about kind of holding together various factions. You're in City Hall, you're kind of out in the community, and then of course you're managing the department. And the allegations, regardless of whether or not Mayor Harrell believes them, I think were becoming enough that he was seeing Diaz's ability to kind of hold that all together falling apart. And I think at the end of the day, he just sort of felt like the distractions here were too great, and it was time to move on.
Especially at a time when they are trying to hire more officers, when they are trying to hire more women. But just talking about Diaz for a little bit longer here, how did you take it that he was going to not, I hear what you're saying in terms of being fired. He's no longer the chief, but working in this special assignments role. That's a really interesting twist here that I guess if you're going to fire him, then have him move on. But I know the mayor was saying again and again, he really valued Diaz's experience and all the work that he's been doing for the Seattle Police Department for the past 27 years. Some thoughts about him moving into a new role. It's an unorthodox thing, it feels like, in terms of when you fire a chief. Having him in a new role in the department is a little different.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's hard to. I could be proved wrong on this. It's hard to see it as anything but a sort of blow softener in a way. You know, I think of Julie Tim of Sound Transit, who was left and then was sort of talked about how she was going to play a transitionary role and support, and then didn't really happen. There have been previous times, you know, in City Hall where a candidate for a job didn't get that final department job, but was then sort of made an advisor. And a lot of times these positions end up just being a way for the person who didn't get the job or who was essentially being fired to kind of save face. That said, I do think that Harrell personally likes Diaz and personally gets along with him and works well with him. I think that some of this is he probably means it, that he likes having Diaz around. How this works, I think, is going to be really complicated. You know, Diaz's last ranked position before he was an assistant chief was a lieutenant.
Right.
And so, you know, as far as generally how union stuff works, you know, I think at first blush that would mean he would become a lieutenant in this job. Harrell talked about how there are ways around that or whatever. But, you know, it's just, can you imagine if the police chief suddenly has a captain who's in charge of him? You know, I mean,
right.
And so it's just kind of an interesting position. And, you know, I mean, I think for whoever the new chief is, that's kind of an interesting position too, if Chief Diaz still works there, to have the person that you're replacing still in the department, you know, it just raises a lot of questions about what actually that's going to do, or what even special projects is. As, you know, anybody who's covered kind of politics in a city long enough, I'm sure feels a little bit of skepticism as to the actual import or value of whatever job that ends up being.
Yeah, how special are these projects really? Yeah. Sure, that's going to be something to scrutinize. And I think a few people asked in the audience there of reporters, "Are you angling for another job in another police department?" And I heard Diaz not rule that out. So I mean, this could be a path somewhere else, and we'll have to see where that goes. But I did want to talk about Diaz's replacement here. So we have an interim chief in Sue Rahr, former King County Sheriff, former head of the state's police academy, the Washington State Criminal Justice Training Commission, President Obama's task force on 21st century policing. She's done a lot of work in her past, and it's been announced she will not be the permanent chief, won't be part of this national job search that's going to take 4 to 6 months going ahead here. And I wanted to raise the question that you wrote about in the Times recently here, the need for an internal candidate versus an external candidate. Always a struggle, always a debate here. The last two internal candidates, if I may, in Carmen Best and Adrian Diaz, just haven't fared so well. So I don't know if you're looking at past history or looking ahead, but internal or external candidate, what do you think is the right call for the city?
As far as what the right call is, you know, there are, I'm sure, arguments for both at certain times. Harrell said he would not rule out an internal candidate, but what I heard him say is basically he prefers external. He said it in a few different ways, that, you know, he's talking about culture change, and he said, this isn't a quote, but basically, I don't feel like I can get the kind of cultural change that is necessary from somebody on the inside. So I would be surprised, I suppose, if he went internal, and partially also because, you know, when Carmen Best was hired, you remember there was some controversy because initially she was not included in the finalists.
That's right.
Despite, you know, being interim chief and having a lot of support from the community. And the reason for that was the search committee at the time really pushed Mayor Durkin to hire somebody from the outside on the belief that that's what the department needed. And one of the people who pushed really hard for that was Tim Burgess, who is now deputy mayor under Harrell. Yep. And so, you know, all signs to me are pointing towards him wanting to find somebody from the outside, especially when, you know, the big question mark here is around culture and what is happening with the culture of the Seattle Police Department. There's a lot of internal fighting clearly happening here. And I think yeah, I mean, for Harrell, I think it's going to look really appealing to bring in somebody fresh who does not have that kind of baggage or history in the department.
Right. And looking at how that hiring process is going to go, our last external candidate, if you will, for the job, Kathleen O'Toole, former Seattle police chief, she is actually going to be helping with this hiring process. And I guess I just wanted to focus on that hiring piece and looking, if I can, forward a little bit here. Is this a situation in terms of this clear and present problem for Seattle police of hiring more people, making sure they're hiring more people of color and women, et cetera? Do you feel like Sue Rahr is going to be able to improve that record there? Because we just heard this week in terms of reports that the Seattle City Council is getting from the Seattle Police Department. Hey, guess what? We thought we were going to hire 31 officers. Looks like it's going to be closer to 11. And the end of the year doesn't look that great either. Do you see Sue Rahr being able to make a turnaround on that with any real immediacy? I guess that's the big question I have.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the immediacy looks like, but I do think that Sue Rahr's hiring here is intentionally tied to some of that, because she's been in the world of law enforcement for a really long time, but more than that has worked kind of specifically on how you get people interested in policing and how you bring them along with big changes. And that's a lot of what she was doing at the police academy and as a consultant. And so I don't know what she will be able to do in the immediate short term, but she's so kind of ingrained in the law enforcement world that, and she understands Washington. If anybody could kind of make an immediate change, it might be her. I think for the mayor's office, this is a pretty solid choice in the interim, and because she's both a veteran in the world of law enforcement, but has managed to kind of move through some pretty high profile positions with kind of retaining her reputation as somebody who's pushing the boundaries on reform. Of course, there's going to be nuance to that, and there's a lot of context around that. But as it's just kind of an impressive thing to have been as public of a figure in the world of law enforcement for as long as she has, and through the times, Black Lives Matter in 2020 and all that, and still sort of retained this strong reputation. Now that she has been appointed, I have a hard time thinking of who else but Sue Rahr could be the one to do this job in 6 months, and she's kind of the only person I can come up with.
And I wanted to briefly, as we wrap up the topic here, read the statement that the Seattle Police Officers Guild wrote in the wake of this decision here. SPOG would like to thank Chief Diaz for his 27 years of police service to our beloved agency. Sarah already thinking he's out the door. And our Seattle community. The rank and file members of SPOG are looking forward to working with Interim Chief Sue Rahr to build back our agency's staffing whilst adhering to Mayor Harrell's One Seattle vision. A short statement there. Do you draw anything from that? Because I think that relationship with SPOG is going to be a very important part of this going forward here.
Yeah, I mean, that's never an easy situation to navigate. And, especially because although there has been a recent contract struck, there are more negotiations still ongoing with SPOG. Going to be some continued fights over pay and accountability, decent chance that the whole negotiation process goes to an impasse. But, again, Rahr has kind of lived in this world for long enough that I doubt it's something that intimidates her very much.
I will say we've got a lot to cover here. We're going to continue to cover this story in the weeks ahead. But, David, thank you for breaking down those different pieces with me. All right. There has been some other news happening this weekend, and we want to make sure that we talk about it because I really want to talk about up next. Why is there now a delay on this highly anticipated move by the council to lower the wages of app-based delivery drivers? We'll have more details next on Now Hear This. So I don't always like to report on news that is not happening, but something that is not happening really is the story this week. And this week, it's the big vote over lowering app-based delivery driver wages. This is legislation sponsored by Council President Sarah Nelson. We've talked about it on the podcast. This is intended to improve the marketplace, which has been in a state of flux since the so-called pay-up law went into effect this January. The app companies, when it went into effect, tacked on $5 fees. The story from restaurants is that orders through these apps have been way down. So that vote from the full council is not happening as it was expected this week. No date set as of yet for that yes-no vote on this measure. And we've heard a lot of testimony about this over the past month. Most drivers saying, please don't lower the wage. Most restaurants saying, you're killing customer demand. You have to lower the wage. I talked with Councilmember Joy Hollingsworth, and remember, she's the one who abstained from voting on this measure when it was in committee. But she told me recently on Council Edition on Seattle Channel that this legislation needed more time to bake. But she did want to support it at the end of the day.
The goal is to get to a yes. So we're going to do a stakeholder meeting with Drive Forward, with the app companies and some small business owners and also some drivers to see what are some of the barriers that we're missing and some gaps that we can close. But that's really important that we kind of restore the ordering, the demand, and we get workers working, and also we protect customers.
David, I know we've talked a lot about this story already. What do you think is behind this delay?
I think there is a genuine desire probably to make some tweaks to this by Councilmember Hollingsworth and Councilmember Moore, who seem to be the two that have been meeting with these outside groups. I think also there's probably an understanding that this is a council that came in saying, we're going to listen to everybody and we're going to, bring in as many voices on this and
sure,
bring compromise back and all that. But to this point, that hasn't really been the case with the pay up legislation. It has been almost entirely the companies and a driver advocacy group associated with the companies who have been at the negotiating table. So maybe you make a complaint about the past city council only dealing with progressive groups. I think there's a probably flip side complaint to say that this one is not working with them at all. I think Councilmember Hollingsworth is showing that she does want to have those conversations. Whether or not anything sort of fundamentally different comes out of them, I don't know. But I think probably Councilmember Nelson wants as many yes votes on this as possible. And if waiting a week or whatever it might be is what it takes to get there, she's willing to do that. I think also there's probably the question of Councilmember Wu. And
I was going to say, is she going to get her vote? Is she going to recuse her vote on this one as the ethics and elections head? Wayne Barnett has asked her to do, or is she not? That's a real interesting wrinkle here.
Yeah, and she said that she wanted to consult with the full 7-panel ethics commission, but the problem there is they don't meet. I don't know exactly the date, but not until next month. I don't know what their meeting date is.
I think it's the early part of June, but keep going.
So, of course you can't get their opinion until they actually meet on this. And so that to me feels like that's part of the delay also.
Sources I've been talking to indicate we could be looking at several weeks here before this legislation comes up again, because there's that meeting, of course, that needs to happen with Councilmember Wu. There's some amendments, apparently, some amendments being worked on here that haven't been made public as of the middle of this week. And I guess that's my question. What amendments do you see potentially happening here, David? Would it be something to, increase that amount of compensation per mile so that there's or wear and tear on the car, something like that? Are those the numbers that we're going to potentially see change?
Possibly, because it has come up and been pointed out that the proposed mileage reimbursement rate is below what the IRS recommends people are reimbursed for driving. That I think gets a little tricky though, because this bill doesn't have any sort of mandate that the companies repeal their fees. And so I think that Councilmember Nelson, for example, is going to start to get a little uneasy if the numbers start to creep back up, because the companies really have all the leverage in this because there is no requirement of anything they do. So if they are not happy with the final result, they're going to keep their fees in place. And then that looks really bad for the whole city council, because then they've lowered wages while not actually eliminating the fees. And so, but I do think that's an issue that's on the table, is the reimbursement. Councilmember Morales, who of course we expect to vote against the revisions here, she said on Tuesday, basically, she doesn't expect this bill to improve substantially at all. So, she is not showing a lot of faith that the final product is going to look that much different. At least that's what she was saying publicly. So I don't know. We'll see. I don't know. I don't know the answer to whether or not the conversations happening are going to lead to something kind of substantively different, or if they're just kind of laying a groundwork for, hey, we've brought everyone to the table here, and we're still landing on this kind of specific framework that we wanted in the first place.
Right. This one is a mess. I know it's been talked about on the national level too. Are these $5 fees junk fees? Well, in the company's minds, this is something that they need to survive, and I'm sure that would be a good legal back and forth as well. So there's a lot more still happening on this. We'll follow this over the next couple of weeks as well. But I did want to talk about yet another vote on legislation that has been delayed this week, a funding measure for the Equitable Development Initiative. So Councilmember Maritza Rivera proposed putting a hold on spending $25.3 million already allotted in this year's budget to these EDI projects, which are grants to organizations to plan and build meeting spaces, housing, community centers, etc. A number of communities of color were up in arms about this. Councilmember Morales called this a block on funding those projects. Councilmember Rivera fired back with a press release saying this isn't a block, it's a proviso on the funds. She says if the council gets a report from the Office of Planning and Community Development about progress on these EDI projects, next steps, etc., by the end of September, so before the budget process, then the hold or proviso is off of these funds, no problemo. I don't know, though, David. I guess I haven't seen this many press releases from the council in the past 5 months than I have in the past 5 years. But what do you make of this war of words, I guess, and what Councilmember Rivera was trying to do with this bill?
This is tricky because, on the one hand, she's right. I mean, because she's saying, this doesn't cut any existing funds to any of these organizations. And that's true because, there's a lot of unspent dollars that are carrying over that have been budgeted to kind of community organizations but haven't been spent yet. She's saying, I want to put a hold on the new dollars until those old dollars are spent. And that is true. That is all happening. The thing that community groups are concerned about, and frankly, the Office of Planning and Community Development has raised well, is that, these development projects take a long time when anyone's doing them. We know what the Seattle process is like as far as permitting goes. Yeah. I layer on top of that these are not well-heeled developers who know how to work the system. These are community organizations. So it's not all that surprising that it's taking them a long time to spend these dollars. And then also, a lot of the money that's allocated is kind of for early stage planning or site acquisition. And the assumption is once they've sort of ticked those boxes, then they can come back to the city and go for the next round of funding. That most of the funding is predicated on there being multiple rounds of this. And so the concern is that if it's being signaled that though the money that is in hand is not being taken away, there's concern that if an organization, say, does in fact spend the money as this proviso says they should, that they have, what's their kind of next step here? Like, are they going to then be, they're going to have a site and a plan, but then no more money to actually begin construction? That's kind of the concern, is that by building in these delays, you kind of leave projects only partially or barely started. Yeah, it's interesting. It's kind of in the category of topics that I didn't expect to become big kind of political hot button issues and then suddenly blow up really quickly. Yeah. And I'm not even sure Councilmember Rivera expected the backlash that she got for this. Right, because she brought it up, and this is Councilmember Morales saying she was trying to sneak it in before the Memorial holiday weekend. And I hear what you're saying in terms of a proviso. That sounds like a very responsible way to be spending money, but I think it's just that larger look of this. And a few of the sources in the council that I've been talking to are telling me that even with these assurances from Councilmember Rivera that she's not taking money away from communities of color, it just doesn't look good, and it might very well fail in a full council vote if they had that vote today. I guess I'm trying to figure out what the scenario is now. Does she continue to press for this? Does she pull it off the table? Or I'm not quite sure what the right move is for her. In the council meeting, they talked a lot about, because there are two requirements around this proviso to be lifted. One of them is a report on the status of these projects. There was a lot of talk about that. Hey, we're just trying to get the report. I'm sure that a report and an update on the status of projects is something that would get probably unanimous or close to unanimous support. The tough part is the other requirement, which is that the carryover money be spent down first by the end of the year, which all but guarantees that $25 million that's on proviso would not be released this year, because there's no way that these organizations are actually going to spend down that $53 million in a year. Again, it's just a slow process. It's just unrealistic. And so I suppose one sort of compromise measure would be, okay, we get rid of the you have to spend all the money requirement, but keep in place the we want a report requirement, because that's something that maybe the department could rush and get out before the end of the year. Well, we'll see what happens next with that one. I appreciate that. That's going to be something we track into next week as well. All right, coming up. Did the asylum seeker crisis we've been talking about that has been growing in Tukwila at the Riverton Park United Methodist Church get its start in Seattle? David's done some digging on this. We're going to get some more details on what's next. Quick follow-up here, folks. I just want to let you know we are looking for your emails. If you're a patron, send them in to Seattle News, Views, and Brews. Spell it all out at gmail.com. We want to answer your questions on the show. But, David, I did want to follow up on the story you recently wrote with Anna Patrick for the Times about asylum seekers, the situation down in Tukwila at the Riverton Park United Methodist Church. Quick review, there's a bunch of asylees down there. Their numbers have grown significantly over the past couple of years to upward of 400 people at a time camping on church grounds at some points. Your research seemed to indicate that as much as Seattle city leaders have said, this is not our problem, this is not our problem, this problem may have started in Seattle.
back in 2022. Can you break down kind of what was going on and what you looked into here?
Honestly, it started with that meeting where there were the arrests.
Yes.
Because, at the time, the council in particular seemed not all that interested in having these conversations with the protesters about its role. We had heard that the Seattle Police Department was kind of involved early on. And, there was this family that showed up kind of in late summer of 2022 with looking for a place to go. And somebody called 911. And initially the police showed up, and then the community service officers showed up. And, at the time, family shelter is just really hard to come by in the region. And so, out of basically an act of desperation, the community service officer called the pastor of this church in Tukwila to ask if they had space to take in this family. And it was the only place that said yes. And better for that family to do that than to be sleeping on the streets. The sort of problem that has flowed from that is that sort of helped establish that church as a destination for asylum seekers. And you've got this pastor who basically doesn't say no to anybody, will take anybody in. Yeah. But now it's become basically her burden to bear this fairly significant influx of asylum seekers into the region, and to the point where it's really overwhelming her and that church beyond probably what she expected or wanted to take on. And so then the question becomes, well, so what is or should the role be of Seattle or King County or the state? And so our reporting sort of focused on Seattle just because it's the biggest city in the region. Other cities across the country have kind of had to bear a lot of the kind of challenges of hosting this many asylum seekers. So, we just kind of wanted to ask the question of if it was, in fact, Seattle City employees, as it appears to be, that helped kind of establish Tukwila as a destination, what kind of duty or responsibility does Seattle have to those people going forward?
Yeah, it's so interesting. I remember talking about this with Hamdi Mohammed, who's the director of the Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs for the city of Seattle. Talked about this with her back in December of last year, and it really has been a situation where Seattle police officers are driving asylees that end up in Seattle down to this church in Tukwila because that's the place, and it's a really, really fraught kind of relationship there because I think King County will tell you, man, we are putting in more than just about any other county into a problem like this, and where is Seattle gonna I don't know, foot the bill here. Do you get any feel from the city of Seattle that more money could be given to this situation, or they're just scared of if you build it, they will come kind of situation? What happens next here?
I think what happens next is a lot of hope is resting on the state to be the kind of main funder here. And there's a significant amount of money that is due later this summer.
From the state,
I mean, there's from the state. There are questions about the speed of bureaucracy here. I don't expect the city to be spending a lot more of its own money. I mean, in part because this is a city that is doing everything it can to cut, and I think they're really loath to add new expenses. And Mayor Harrell says that he's not scared of Seattle becoming a magnet for asylum seekers, but I don't know that you can put that totally out of your brain, because when you look at how quickly word spreads when there is places that can offer help, not only does it become more attractive to the asylum seekers, but other states and other governments suddenly see an opportunity to kind of lessen some of their responsibility here. And so, we've heard of fairly official people in places like Arizona handing out the church's address. And so just imagine if Seattle became known as a destination, you can imagine that would pick up speed quite a bit. And so, it is a genuinely tricky situation for the city, which is it's a problem. It's a situation that started in their city and with the help of their city employees. But at the same time, if they're seen as kind of taking too big of a role here, then, maybe it becomes something like Denver, where they're spending $90 million this year to address the problem.
That's another story we're going to have to keep an eye on. But thank you very much for that, David, and really great piece with you and Anna. Check that one out in the Times, folks, if you haven't already. All right, time to wrap up. David, I saw the Mariners in person this week on a Tuesday night with a win that the Mariners earned, and I'm going to put that in huge air quotes. There was a walk, a number of a ground ball, the third, and then a throwing error by the Astros. I look up, and it's 4-2 M's for the win. I just want, how long can they keep this whole chaos ball thing up? I can't believe it when I see them at the top of the standings, and that's how they made it work. It's crazy.
I know, yeah. This team isn't good enough to depend on skill alone. They need a little bit of luck and a little bit of chaos. So I'll take it when I can get it.
That's kind of the way we're looking at it for sure. Yeah. Well, thank you, Dave, always for joining me. Thanks to everybody listening to this episode of Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. Thanks especially to patrons who support the show. If you want to be a patron, find the podcast on Patreon, folks. Seattle News, Views, and Brews. We're on Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen, we are there. And thanks for watching also on Converge Media. We'll see you next time.
Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2024.